It's the same idea, a different pitch, and quicker. Left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right. It's a haunting song. It really is. It's almost a creepy piece of music, especially the first minute or so. It's scary and at the same time incredibly intimate. It's like a door has been opened into the most profound corners of someone's soul and we've walked inside. And this is where we are now, deep within Pink's mind and heart, watching as he becomes transformed into a hideous being. As we experienced in the previous song, when the worms ate into his brain, the music carried us inside at that time too. There's a metamorphosis which Pink goes through in this album. Actually, we could say we witness him go through more than one metamorphosis before it's all over. But at this point, cocooned as he is, a transformation is taking place. Not a physical one, but a psychological one. Something that makes him end up a very different person at his core. And we get to watch it from the front row, so to speak. We are on the inside here. Though, of course, if Pink knew we were here, well, anyway, interestingly, there's not much music happening at first. Rather, a sort of haunting, empty soundscape. A few swirls of sound, some deep drones, a few seconds of oscillation between a couple notes that fade in and then fade out again. Some wild screams in the distance which kind of morph into a siren effect. We even get to hear the flies buzzing again, reminding us of the context and situation that we're in. And it's all very lonely and scary, even though there's actually nothing really going on. It's kind of like when a small child is alone in the dark. Every little sound becomes terrifying, and we get to hear that terror in Pink's voice as he tentatively asks the question, is there anybody out there? I think it's incredibly great how it's set so that his voice sounds too loud, even though he's speaking at a frightened, barely voiced volume level. Somehow the way things are balanced in the production of this song is so effective. You know how it feels when the room is so silent and even the slightest bit of sound in your voice sounds way too much. That's what it sounds like in this song. And then, after a long silence, he asks again. But this time, we hear a little quaver in his voice as he begins. Each time the question is asked, there's some slight shift in the way he speaks it, so that different elements are brought to our attention each new time. And that's all that is said here, verbally at least. The music starts to fade. We think it's coming to an end, but then something else starts to become visible, audible. An alternating octave note. Much like what we heard at the beginning of Goodbye Cruel World, only this time it's quicker. And then suddenly, unexpectedly, out of all this frightening ambiguity, there comes a sudden sense of order as the guitar solo begins its gentle arpeggios. I've spent a great deal of time thinking about this solo. Does it have any significance here? And if so, what? Because it's so strikingly different than everything else around it. It sounds so incredibly tender, sensitive, even balanced and well-grounded. Yes, it is melancholy, lonely even, but comfortably so. There isn't any of the trauma and chaos, depression, fear, or insanity that we find so abundantly everywhere else in this part of the story. It reminds me a bit of the pure, unsuspecting innocence of the little boy when he says, "Mummy, look, there's an airplane in the sky." And so is it just a nice little moment of reprieve for us, the audience? Is it merely something he picked out on the guitar and liked so much he had to include it somewhere, so why not stick it here? Or is there some greater significance? Well, regardless whether it's meant to have a deeper meaning, I think it is, in fact, very well suited to this moment in the story. You see, this is the period in which Pink reorganizes himself, pulls himself together, finds some kind of purpose that enables him to carry on. Now, it's not a healthy reset, but it does bring some kind of order to his life nonetheless. Is he aware of what the consequences will be? Not likely. And this interlude, which is actually in the style of a prelude with its clearly organized patterning, is a kind of representation of that, as well as suggesting that he feels a kind of peacefulness concerning this transformation. Much like the little boy who so innocently pointed out the airplane in the sky, without having a clue of the impending doom. I find it fascinating that the movie also picked up on this element of character transformation and shift towards organization at this point in the music. Not surprisingly, we see this reflected in multiple ways in the movie scenes. But let's start with the only line of the song, which is repeated again 3 more times. Is there anybody out there? Isn't it interesting? A 2-minute, 40-second song with only one 5-word question. And yet, such a deep, haunting piece of music. Interesting, but not really surprising at this point. You see, I'm getting to know Roger Waters' work by now. So this question. Pink wanted an answer. He wanted to know whether anybody was out there. But did he really want to find somebody, or did he simply want to be sure that he was now completely isolated? Personally, I tend towards the first, that he became afraid of his isolation and wanted some company. But the way in which he asks it each time reveals a journey throughout the question itself. First, we hear it quite simply, without any significant emphasis, almost like a test to see if it works. The next time it happens, the out there part of the question is accentuated, kind of punched a bit. And then we hear that eerie scream following. The third time, there's a pause before out there. Is there anybody out there? As if we stop mid-question to listen for a moment. Is there anybody out there? Did we hear something? Or perhaps, is it even worth finishing the question? Is there anybody out there? This gap helps to both separate those 2 words and make them the focal point. Musically, it's painting the vast distance between Pink and anyone and everything else, as well as showing us where his attention and desire is focused in this moment. Out there. Searching out there for some presence other than himself, and this time, perhaps for the first time, without any kind of blame shifting or deflecting responsibility apparent. Finally, as the music builds toward a climax, the question is repeated once more. And in this last iteration, his voice never rises, ending up more as a declarative than a question. As if by asking the question, he's answered it himself. It also gives it a sort of a more menacing tone. Is there anybody out there? Now, obviously, nobody answers Pink's question. All we hear in response is the vast space and eerie silence of out there. What would have happened if there were an answer? We don't know. But probably we wouldn't have witnessed the fascist Pink being born, at least not yet. My point is this: the lack of any response to the question was the catalyst for Pink's radicalization. Even when one is unbalanced, it's much harder to become a dangerous fanatic when enmeshed and embedded within the fabric of society. There has to be some degree of distancing which takes place. By cutting all the strands of connection which bound him to society, Pink was primed for radicalization, and the lack of an answer to his question is what pushed him to take the final step. And so we have to ask, why was there no answer to his question? Was there truly nobody out there? Or could he simply not hear any of those who were out there? Or perhaps could nobody out there hear him? At this moment in the narrative, we have no answer to that question. But looking ahead to the end of the album, we do know that there were others out there, the bleeding hearts and the artists, and that they were not insensitive towards him. But at this phase in his journey, Pink's wall was too high for communication to pass either in or out. And so, in his isolation, he begins to find something else to anchor him, to give him a sense of purpose, so that by the end of the song, a new evil person has emerged. Remember what happens in the music as his questioning ends? The subtle oscillating octaves which gradually emerge from the void. Remember that this is the same pattern we heard earlier in Goodbye Cruel World. It's different notes, but it's the same octave pattern, one and then the other. But now the pace is quicker. It feels a bit different, almost like two equal legs. Left, right, 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 left, right. It's startlingly close to a march tempo, a kind of, well, we could take it as a kind of portent of what is yet to come. This is where his mind begins to take that shape. And then the guitar solo. What a beautiful piece of music. But let's not get lost in the beauty of it, because we want to understand its place here in this context. As I mentioned earlier, it's incredibly orderly, structured, straightforward in its design. There are all manner of patterns throughout, systematically repeated and repeated and repeated. And even when it leans into dissonance, there's a clarity about it, a predictability about it all. And it's fascinating to me that the movie scenes reflect this as well. There is Pink, collecting and arranging the shattered pieces of the disaster he made during one of my turns. He's carefully arranging them into order, building shape, design, structure, meaning out of it. Again, remember to think symbolically. Pink is collecting all the pieces of his shattered self, designing, planning, organizing, building up his new self, the new Pink. He's clearly not normal. He's obsessed. But he's building something out of it all. It reminded me a bit of Russell Crowe in A Beautiful Mind, as he shows us the schizophrenia of the brilliant mathematician John Nash. Pink, too, is trying to detect or create patterns in the meaningless or out of the meaningless chaos around and within himself. You can see how obsessed he is with the details. Even the empty Coca-Cola can's place is rearranged, 2 or 3 times, as if it would make any difference. But for him, it does make a difference. And the camera zooms out to reveal the overall picture of the room. Still senseless for any sane person, but this time arrayed in patterns which, at least for Pink's mind, make sense. And then the final scene, and it's incredibly terrifying. He's in the hotel bathroom, but the scenes are recorded in such a way that the bathroom can easily pass as a hospital, and it's worth asking why. What could a hospital have to do with anything here? Well, just as the attempt of a janitor to enter his room had to do with a child's conception, so now a hotel room with a hospital-like appearance kind of implies a birth. Also, sterility. Here in this place, Pink stands at the mirror, shaving. Just as the music conveys a sense of reflection, so also here the mirror implies Pink's further review of himself. And as he shaves his face, we see through his eyes that a new idea is emerging in his mind, and he begins to pursue it, shaving his body. And it gets bloody, but he doesn't care. He's focused, actually fascinated by this new vision of himself. And after he's done shaving his body, he pauses, reflecting again on his new appearance. And notice how the music itself is a very reflective style, manner, pace. And then he goes further, shaving his eyebrows, though we only witness his blood dripping into the water. And then we find ourselves waiting outside the bathroom door for him to emerge. And when he does, his new appearance is shocking. And I'm not talking here only about the shaved eyebrows, but also his new hairstyle, everything. What does this all mean? Well, all these details, first of all, take us back to the idea of a birth, of a newly born infant, baby. He's gotten this idea of a new path for his life, which is so utterly different from everything he used to be, that it's practically equivalent to becoming a new person, a new man. Remember how the guitar solo seems suspended in time, perhaps even outside of time. It's the waiting period of a caterpillar inside a cocoon. Nothing is visible on the surface, but what's happening inside is a massive transformation. And now, as Pink emerges, the sculpture of his face, as well as the look in his eyes, everything tells us all about the character of this new persona. We've just witnessed a metamorphosis from the inside, a birth into the evil fascist Pink, who dominates the scenes in some of the upcoming songs. Just a side note, I won't get into this, but interesting to note that remember that the fascists were the ones who killed his father. Now, one of the important elements of this transformation is that now, rather than a passive, infantile, impotent persona, Pink has suddenly taken the reins. He is now deciding and conducting the course of things. This guitar solo, as we've noted, is very structurally organized and anchored in the tonic home. And in fact, we hardly hear anything other than the arpeggiated tonic A minor chord. Everything is anchored on A. And the very systematic up and down, up and down. It only ventures to shift to the relative major of C a couple times. But what's fascinating to notice is that the melody found beneath these broken chords comes from empty spaces. What shall we do? Now, it's just just modified a touch. Notice what happens on the upper note. I'll play it up here. This is empty spaces. Now here, listen. Slightly different, it's more dissonant. But still, it's the same melody. Now, of course, we could say that it is the same leitmotif that we found featured throughout the album, and we'd be right. After all, that's what we observed when we dug into empty spaces. But it's even more than that. Here, it's in the exact same form as in empty spaces. What shall we do to fill the empty spaces? Not only does this slow, melancholy pacing of it, with some of the notes repeating along the way, help to create the sense of deep loneliness which we feel in the solo here, but because it is quoting empty spaces, it's telling us something important. Here in this solo, this interlude, prelude, we suddenly see that this restructuring of Pink's life, this reorganization, is his answer to his question, what shall we use to fill the empty spaces? And this is what Pink chooses to do with the empty spaces. This is how he sets about to fill them, to build a sense of meaning out of his broken life. Not with relationships, but with a routine, a plan, a purpose. I guess one of the things that I'm enjoying about this journey through the wall is the many ways in which its message is communicated and the beautiful collaboration, a kind of marriage between the music and the lyrics. It's far more than some really great sounding music that is incredibly satisfying to listen to. And it's far more than a set of lyrics which are darkly thought-provoking. It's more than that because of such moments as this. So much of what this song has to tell us is through musical cross-references and allusions. We have to go to Goodbye Cruel World. We have to remember, look, Mummy, there's the airplane in the sky. Then we have to go to empty spaces and so on. And it's incredibly rewarding to dig in and explore it in detail. There's a depth to the work which rewards us when we dive in. You know, it's entirely possible to have great lyrics or great music, or even both at once. The music sounds good, the lyrics say something worth hearing, and it's great. But when a work is constructed in such a way that one illuminates the other, each one contributes to the meaning, to the message, to the value of the work, then we can enjoy it on the surface, but we can also be sure that there are more dimensions to be discovered if we look closer. And in the case of this album, the interconnectivity between songs, not only between the lyrics, but especially between the music, is crucial to building a full understanding. This is where having or developing an understanding of music can be incredibly helpful in deciphering these details, which opens up a whole new level of enjoyment towards this kind of art. And so here we find within the music, I'm talking especially about the guitar solo, Pink's answer and his determination. He's going to clean things up, organize, purify, and bring everything into line. He'll fight for it. He'll sacrifice for it. He'll suffer for it. But he will do it. Now, as we've observed several times throughout this saga, not only is the wall symbolic, representative of the many and varied barriers which can exist and be built in one's life, Everything within this album is allegorical. Even his fascist ideology is symbolic, representing a mindset and attitude which we know by experience and by history that it is dangerous. And it's up to each one of us to listen, to interpret, and to learn from this cautionary tale. One more question we need to consider is, why did Pink come to this decision at this point in time? What triggered the decision? Why here? Why now? Why not earlier or later? We find the answer in the first part of the song. For Pink, there's nobody out there. He is so divorced from society that he lives essentially in a sterile environment. And that's why I think that the hospital-like appearance is also important to notice. If we are looking at what the movie is picking up out of the music. Of course, sterile environments are necessary for some things, but there's a dangerous element about them too. Because, as we know, if some organism manages to get into that kind of environment, it spreads like wildfire simply because there's no competition, nothing to keep it in check. And so here it is with Pink. Now, we all have tendencies which are less than admirable. We all have weak points. So does society. That's human nature. That's the nature of the world. But we don't solve those problems by running from them, hiding from them, cutting ourselves off from them, building walls or other means of isolation or simplification, trying to simplify and, we could say, can I invent a word, patternize our world? Make it all into clearly understandable patterns. It didn't work for Pink. It won't work for anybody. The results are never good. It only clears the way for the dangerous, dark elements of human nature to develop and spread. This is how a monster is born. This is how a dictator is born. This is how a killer is born. I'll see you next time.